this morning. So allow me to introduce to you this morning David Waweru, who is the CEO of World Alive Publishers. Also is an author. Also we do have with us John Mwazemba, who is the General Manager, Oxford University Press, East Africa. We're eagerly waiting for Nganga Mbugwa, who is the Deputy Managing Editor here at Nation Media Group, and also Modoni Gallant to join us much later in the course of the program as soon as they arrive. And we continue apace with, of course, the discussions. But we're talking about the reading culture, and I just want to hear from them. Of course, they've been in this particular circle for quite a while, and they can tell us where we are at. Have we made any progress as far as reading is concerned? Do we also just read to pass our exams, or do we just read also for leisure, to enjoy, our fictional books and, some of the genres that we have amongst many books that are written by different authors? Allow me to just hear from them this morning. We can begin with David Waweru. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on AM Live this morning, Leadership Forum.
Thank you.
Reading. You're an author. First of all, maybe we can just hear from you. Are you an avid fan of books in the first place?
Graciously, I am. And it's a habit that I cultivated from a very early age. I always like giving credit to the people who introduced me to writing. And these are my mom's youngest sisters. And when I was very young, they were in high school. And they always came back during holidays with tomes of books.
Yes.
And as early as primary school, I started enjoying, reading serious authors like Jeffrey Archer, and in secondary school reading people like Robert Ludlum, who I don't still understand how I comprehended them those days, because up to now I still have to comprehend with their plots. So yes, I did develop a culture of reading at a very early age, helped by family members who themselves were readers.
All right, let's hear also from John. How did you find yourself in this space of being a publisher? You involved with books? Do you go way back?
I go way back, but unlike my friend here, my parents were actually literate. So there was nobody at home to show me or give me books. Every book I read when I was young is a book I borrowed. But I think what has helped me is curiosity. I'm always curious. I want to find out things. So, and that has really helped me, because I remember even I used to read pieces of a newspaper. I'm sent to the shop.
Yes.
And then mandazi is tied and wrapped rather in a piece of paper, The Nation or The Standard. Those days, because we couldn't buy the paper. First of all, it was so much deep in Taita, in the village. We couldn't get the daily paper, so we got those pieces of paper, and I would read, and my mom would just get surprised. Yeah.
All right, so far, since then and now, how would you say as Kenyans, have we developed that culture, or is it tapering away with the advent of course, of the mobile phone and the digital era that we are in?
I think Kenyans read. It just depends on what they read, because some of them say they read text messages or Facebook posts.
Yes.
But reading for pleasure, I think, is something that is not very well developed, where somebody just picks a book just to enjoy, to travel to another world, to just excite their mind, just for adventure. I think that's the habit we need to inculcate.
All right, is it maybe the societal philosophy that we've maybe put out there? So many vijana muongeze pia bidii, mkimaliza kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana. So this means then we're tying the education truly to the employment bit, but we're not reading to just maybe as a good test that we want to feel like this is a good art of relaxing. Maybe you can tell us more on this, David.
Yes, a goal in anything is always critical, because it shapes how you do it. And if you look back even in our school days, and even how school was run when I went to school, which is many years ago, is basically that education, the goal of education was tied directly to a good job. There was a predictable path. You go to school, you get good grades, you go to university or college, you get a good job, you get married, you get 2, 3, 4 children, and you live well forever after. And basically, the whole ethos and the whole structuring of our education system
Yes.
was such that we were geared basically towards reading for the examination, so that then we can get the big thing,
Yes.
which is a job and a decent income. And when you look at what reading really ought to be, the goal of reading, whereas yes, it helps us achieve that as one of the goals, but there are very many other goals that it helps us do. For example, reading basically helps us in personal development, because apart from educational books, there is a dearth of other books, what you call the trade books, that help us understand the world around us in a better way, that help us travel further than we can physically travel, that helps stretch our imagination muscle and keep us on the cutting edge
Yes.
of creativity and all that. So, and if we look at the wholesome goal of reading, then we recognize that education is probably just one of those paths. And the unfortunate thing is that what happens in our system, like when I still remember when I was in primary school,
Yes.
I got punished for reading a novel in school. And the message that was passed to me is that you can't do any other reading. It's a crime to do any other reading. But it's just that I was a passionate reader, and I continued to engage with other works apart from academic works. So that's number one. Number two is, if you look at how our school has been structured, and I hope we are going to change that with the new curriculum, is that right from nursery school, you hear kids from nursery school going home with homework. You find kids in standard 1 loaded up with a heavy load of textbooks, and they're supposed to do homework after school. They started off very early,
Yes.
because as you know, kids start off before 7 o'clock and they get home very late, and they go with homework. They go with weekend homework. When they go on holiday, they are sent with home. So the entire time is crowded with textbooks. And it is so frustrating because they can't even cope with the amount of textbook work that they have to do. So time to do other creative things. Forget even reading for leisure, even play. Do our kids have time to play? And you know that the default learning style of kids is basically play. They don't have time to, it's crowded out. And that's why I'm saying that our education system is geared towards working against reading for leisure. And so, and we fail to realize that really reading for leisure is the cheapest form of entertainment that we can ever get.
Right, and do you think maybe we've relegated our readings, as we mentioned before, that maybe even when you go to universities, it is just for the English literature, you'll pass your literature if you have this particular set of books to read, or this is actually just a hobby for the geeks. These are the people who love to read, wearing some thick spectacles, and they're tucked in a corner somewhere, with a big tome, or a tome in itself.
Yeah, I think reading is a habit. So what happens with the habit is you form it and you break it. And for you to form a habit, psychologists say you have first of all have a reminder, which is called a cue. Something has to trigger when you see something, and then there has to be a routine. That's something you do every now and then, and then there has to be a reward. So the reason why it's so hard to break from the cycles of habits we have, which are hindering us from reading.
Yes.
There must be other things that we are doing, maybe tweeting. Those who tweet, there's some people who tweet, throughout. They are like, there are people who are famous for that. We know them, let's not mention names. And others, so if you spend all your time, 5 hours, 7 hours, 6 hours on Facebook or tweeting, or that's a habit you formed, or you spend your hours doing something. So I think that's the basic the way I understand it, is that it's something that you form. You begin reading a book, you can even begin reading a page per day. You can begin reading a chapter per day. But you just have to teach yourself that habit. And then something else I've also discovered, because I have 3 children. And I've realized that when they see me reading, they also read. So the reading culture, because it's a culture, it's not something that can be given to publishers alone. Publishers have been bashed for not encouraging the reading culture. The government has been bashed for not encouraging the reading culture. But it's like we have to depend on very many facets, the entire community. The parents have to play their role at home.
Yes.
Yeah, in their formative years, they have to see books. Some of us have, thankfully, libraries. That for me, I have a big library. I've not read, I think, half of the books there. I'm struggling, but when I walk into that library, I feel smart just by walking, just by walking into it. So I think we have to begin at home. Then we should not leave it to just the teachers alone, because most of the work has been left to teachers alone or house helps. Parents have to be involved.
Parents have to be involved.
Yes.
Right. We just want also to go to that session where we'll give you an opportunity to go walk to the lectern there and talk to Kenyans about the reading culture. We are reading culture. If we're reading, what are we reading? Are we reading just the newspapers or the magazines? Are we reading also the texts, the tweets, the Twitterati community? They can actually tell us more about that. But we want to hear you as an author, first of all. What has been your challenges? How did you also break through as an author? In Kenya, we know it's very hard sometimes because of some of the insurmountable challenges. When you're actually trying to get a good publisher, they turn you away for so many or many times. Of even famous authors like Stephen King, before they actually had their first manuscript published, they were giving up. After writing so many manuscripts, like 50 of them, and trashing them, right? We know the story. But finally, that maybe it's the 50th manuscript that will actually give you a breakthrough. We do not know. We want to hear from you how actually it happened. So I just want to give you the rules of engagement on the Leadership Forum. When, of course, you'll walk to the podium, we'll give you 5 minutes. I have my bell with me, right? If you're done with the 5 minutes, you don't have to exhaustively use your 5 minutes. You can actually do 2 or 3, but if you have a lot to tell us, you can use 5. Beyond 5, I'll ring the bell. But midway, I'm going to raise it just to let you know that actually you're midway, so that now you can also be preparing your thoughts on how you can give us also your closing remarks as well. Also, you remember you're tethered to the mic, right? We have another mic on the lectern there. So as you walk there, remember just to remove your mic, place it at the back of your seat, walk over to the lectern, and then speak to Kenyans. Your camera is camera 3. Of course, you have the liberty to look at John here and me. We're still waiting for them. By the way, I've seen just a text from Mudhoni Galan that she's slept through her alarm. She says, "So sorry, my alarm did not go off, and now it will take too long to get there." Right, so it seems that we won't have Mudhoni here with us as well, just for a gender balance, as they normally bash us that we are manuals, right? But now here we are again. Opportunity has been lost to have also a panelist from the other gender to join us this morning as well. But still eagerly waiting also for Manganga Mbuga, who's stuck in traffic. He's on his way. But in the meantime, we want to hear from David Waweru. So David Waweru, I'll give you this chance maybe to just remove your mic and walk over to the podium and talk to Kenyans. Briefly, before we take a short break, we want to hear what has he been doing so far. He's the author of so many books. He will tell us more about these particular books that he's come also with in the studio today, and we'll give you also some of his books as well. But we want to hear from you this morning. What books are you reading? Right? Tell us on Twitter, what books are you reading and how is it fascinating? What are you learning from these books? And which one do you think is a rich repository of knowledge? Well, it depends on what angle of the academia you are in. Are you reading for pleasure, or are you reading also for just exams, for educational purposes? So we'll hear from David this morning. David, you have 5 minutes, beginning now.
Well, thank you very much. I think what I will do is first to begin with what concerns very many Kenyans, which is basically education. If you look at most of the progressive countries around the world, there are certain decisions that they made at a very early stage of their formation. And one of the questions that many of those countries asked themselves is that what kind of a society do we want to be in 100 years, for example? Mm-hmm. I mean, they took a long-term view of things in crafting nationhood. And you will find that, without exception, the greatest countries identified education as one of those critical pillars that will help them become the kind of society they want to be. One, economically, secondly, socially, and thirdly, politically. And of course, there are very many other facets. And so education became a very key pillar at a very early stage. So what were some of the decisions that were made is that we will have good education, and every single one of our citizenry will have access to that education. And when you look at Kenya's vision, for example, 2030, it basically also identifies education as one of those very key pillars that will help drive industrialization and help us achieve all the other goals of Vision 2030. Now, you will find that in that social pillar where it identifies education, it basically talks about quality education, not just education, quality education. Now, when you talk about where we are as a nation, we have done very well in terms of providing access. And so we have well over 70% or 80% of kids who ought to be in school who are already in school. And this year, we took a major leap where we had almost 100% transition from primary school to secondary school. So in terms of, in terms of access, we are doing very well. I think the pillar that we are still struggling with is the pillar of quality. When kids go to school, because it's different, schooling is different from education, getting an education. You can go through school without a good education. And all the reports we have been getting seem to indicate that we actually have a problem, because we have kids who are in standard 8 who cannot comprehend text. For standard 2, they cannot do basic arithmetic operations for a much lower class, meaning that then there is a problem in terms of quality. Now, and what are some of the problems that are affecting performance at the school level? Basically, you will find that research has shown that reading is the critical driver that is influencing performance at the school level. Because when children are not able to comprehend the text that they are reading, they're not going to perform well. And even if they went through schools, the school system, they will have only created gaps that they cannot fill out later because they missed out on the critical competency that is required for being a good student. Now, so we have a majority of people go out there, they didn't have the basic reading skills, they didn't therefore perform well, and then at we have exams which basically brand them as failures. And we all know the end game of our results is to pronounce that we have failure rate of 60, 70, 80%, which is incomprehensible. So at a very early stage, we've already called them failures. Now, so they get out into the market, you know what they will encounter. There will be joblessness, there will be destitution. Today, when you look at our population, those who never continued after primary school, after secondary school, after university, it's a bit scary, and it's only a ticking bomb. And so, as far as I am concerned, we must address the literacy question from a very early stage. It's not a habit that you are likely going to pick up much later in school if all you do is try to survive on a day-to-day basis. If you can't put a meal on the table, you most likely are not going to afford to buy a book, no matter how cheap that book will be. So I would say that we have a structural problem that we must address. And I think one of the things that we should determine as a nation is basically to ensure that reading of books is basically put as a high priority, which also means that we've got to have policy that gives a priority position for the book. And that's exactly what these countries that I mentioned have done. That is why you will see they have inculcated reading into their culture. They read for their kids when they're in their mother's womb. When the kids come out, the first gifts they get will be those hard books. And through the school system, the school, they have academics, but they have also time to read. Libraries have been given a priority area in schools. If you go to those countries, you will find that every community has got their own library. And that's basically putting the book in the face of people, giving people no reason not to want to read. But secondly, is also, like I mentioned, the school timetable, ensuring that there is flexibility to help kids play and to help kids read. But I think finally is to say that just because we were not privileged to have been products of policies that cultivate the culture of reading, should not be an excuse for us not to read. Because when you read, there are several things that happen. One is that you get entertained, and if we look at our nation, we actually are a society that lives under a lot of stress. Right now, we are under the stress of flooding.
Yes.
Not because it is basically necessarily a natural calamity, but simply because our engineers, who are well schooled, have gone to the best schools, have designed our roads in a way that makes and ensures that with the smallest rainfall, our roads will be impassable. We have people very well educated in public offices making decisions, for example, of allocating riparian land. And all these are functions of our ability to think clearly and to think on the long term. So I would say, I think we do have a reading problem, but let me conclude by saying that there are people who in this country are reading, and it may be a small band, but there are people who are passionate readers who move from one book to the other.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David Waweru, the CEO of World Alive Publishers. Thank you for those sentiments. Of course, he's raised some of the issues that we will be discussing on, of course, later in the program. We want also to hear right now from John Mwazemba, who's a general manager from Oxford University Press, East Africa. We want to know, how did he go, or how did he come to this particular platform where is a world of publishing, and how is it critical for this country, even as we have the advent of the digital era with us. He's, the hard copy, really what we need. We're going to hear these questions, and of course, we also will want to hear from you. What books are you reading this morning, or are you reading at the moment, so that now we can highlight some of his books as well, and the critical questions you have regarding the reading culture in this country. So do we have it skewed, or are we pumping our children to just read to pass exams? So we have so much curricula that they have to ingurgitate, and then they regurgitate that while they're sitting for the exams. And what does that portend for the nation? Is that why many labor, or the labor sector is really complaining that there's such a disconnect between, the skill set that we have from the universities and the experience that, yes, is actually needed in the labor market? We have John Mwazemba on the lectern. He has 5 minutes beginning now, sir. Just talk to us, talk to Kenyans.
Thanks a lot. Somebody said that education is the great equalizer. I believe that, because some of us grew up, like personally, I grew up in the village, and I said my parents were not literate. There was nobody at home who could help me read. There were no books at home. But I usually say that reading, it needs software and hardware. Now, hardware is what my friend was talking about. When talking about policies, we're talking about government backing, we're talking about the presence of books. I call that hardware. But there is something called software. Software is the motivation. It is that thing that pushes you to read. And if you want to read, for instance, what I've realized about life is, if you want something bad enough, or so bad, it comes to you. So for me, because I really wanted to read, I will go to class and borrow books. I remember reading Moses by Barbara Kimenye. They are the books that are published by Oxford University Press, incidentally. So when I joined Oxford, of course, I was happy to see them in the fold. But that time I didn't know that one day I'll even work for Oxford University Press, and I was borrowing those books from friends. So reading, you need the software and the hardware. And I think the hardware, the software is actually even more powerful than the hardware. You can have books in school. You can have books at home. Actually, they usually say the students who are in school now are advantaged because they are seeing books in schools. Some of us grew up not seeing books. I remember a teacher talking about plaster of Paris, and I didn't know what that was, because not learning art and craft in the village was very difficult. They're talking about plaster of Paris, and we are used to mud. So there are so many things, there are so many advantages that we have. Let's not look for excuses. Let's just begin reading today. And reading is a habit. And I was saying that for you to form a habit, you need a cue, like the way you see food and then you want to eat. That's a cue, And then you also need a reward, and you need a routine. So every morning, if you read every morning a page, or if you read every morning a chapter, that's how you inculcate this.
Yes.
So I'm saying that Kenyans read, but some of them read other things. They read newspapers, they read for exams, they read very many other things. So I cannot say that Kenyans do not read. They read, but it depends on what they read. But for Nairobi, because I go to book launches and I go to book events, we have a clique of people. Maybe I can put them about 3,000 or 5,000 who go to every book event, who buy every book. These Kenyans, if you say that people don't read, get really offended. But the truth is, I'm a publisher. I know the sales we make for novels. He's one of our authors, Mr. Nganga here. He knows that if you publish a good novel in Kenya,
yes,
which has even won the Jomo Kenyatta Award, you cannot sell more than 10,000 copies. It's hard to sell in a year. But if the same novel is picked by KICD and the Ministry of Education to be a set book, you can even sell 500,000 copies. So that tells you there is a problem. Yeah. So we cannot deny the fact that there's a problem we need to work on. And we just need to learn how to read for pleasure. Because I've also learned that the more you read, the more you think cognitively, the more you think better, the more you think logically, the more you communicate even better. We have graduates who can't even form, coherent sentences. And I was glad the other day I read my 10-year-old's composition. He wrote about the family. And it was very coherent because he reads. It is something you can actually, it's a story, it's something you could follow up. He's talking about the mother, talking about the father. I could even see myself there. So reading at an early age helps you to develop cognitively. You can be reading, one of the things that surprised me is that you can be reading literature and it's helping you with science because it expands your mind. It expands how you think. When you get into an argument or into a debate with somebody who reads, their level of thinking is way up. It's up there. It's top notch. When they come for an interview and you interview them, when they speak, when they open their mouths to speak, what comes out of their mouth is something heavy. But people who don't read are very shallow. They're not comprehensible. They are not coherent. They are not logical. They can't communicate. So there are so many other benefits. And you can be reading a novel and it's helping you with, understanding science. Because this world, reading uses words. And the words help you to imagine worlds. So when you imagine things, it's the same thing you use for science. If you go to a science class to read, you imagine and you form mental pictures. And when you're reading a novel about New York, even if you've never been there, you can form, mental pictures of the subways and the things which are there. So it really helps you. Yeah, it helps you become sharper, let me say. Yeah.
Right, thank you.
Thanks
thank
a
you.
lot.
Thank you very much, John Zemba, who's the General Manager of Oxford University Press. Please, you can have a seat. Thank you for those points that you've raised today. Of course, as he's mentioned, also your cognitive processes will increase when you are, interacting with books. Let's not have excuses on why we're not reading. Let's just pick up books and read. And we should also go for these book launches as well and see what other authors are doing, what other writers also have up their collective sleeves. So we want to also talk about the level of thinking. Do we have also systems that maybe are adopted from world-renowned thinkers, right? We know of Socrates, Plato, we know of these people, Leonardo da Vinci as well, and other countries have framed, their curricula around these thinkers. Are we making our children think to be critical thinkers, or are we just making them to be people who actually cram books to pass exams? Those are some of the things that we need also to drill deeper and talk about this morning as well. We want to hear from Nganga Mbugua. Nganga Mbugua is the editor of the Saturday Daily Nation. If Nganga, you'll just walk to the lectern as well to talk to Kenyans. He's an author as well of various books, and he'll tell us more about that. So, of course, also Saturday Nation have a segment where it's all about the Reader's Corner. If you're a literati, then that will be also something that will pique your interest as well, where they also get to discuss different books, and they have various authors also having their view on how the literary world is growing here in the country, around East Africa as well. So we want to hear from Nganga Mbugo this morning to tell us more about what he thinks, scoping the matter, scoping around, of course, the world of books and reading. How is it also panning out for Kenya? Nganga, you have 5 minutes beginning now.
Okay, thank you very much, Dibal. Good morning, viewers. The first thing I want to say is that I am an optimist for books. When publishers say there is no reading culture, my rejoinder to them is that reading culture is not something that happens overnight. It's not like you'll have an earthquake and then people will wake up one morning and start reading. It's a long-term investment. And the love of reading starts very early. For myself, I started loving stories by listening to my grandmother by the fireside. And when I grew up, I saw my aunties and my uncles reading, and I used to borrow their books. When I became a teenager, I grew up in Nakuru. I would go to the National Library to read the books there. And I remember by the age of maybe 1920, I had read more than 60 books in the African Writers series. And from there, I got to enjoy reading. And it started occurring to me that if this is something I enjoy doing, maybe I could become a writer. So today, I have published 19 books. 3 of them are award winners. 3 of them are bestsellers, including one that is published by Mozemba. So when he says that books don't sell and he gives me good checks every August, for me, I choose to be on the side of optimism. I'm also happy that as the editor of the Saturday Nation, we are doing something to encourage the reading culture. You will remember that when the Reader's Corner started, it was only 1 page. Today is about 6 pages. And one of the things we have been doing is to highlight the books that are new in the market. We encourage debate about reading. There was a time when we used to invite authors to tell us their experiences in the writing journey. And we have a Reader's Corner where we get feedback from readers. About a year ago, we introduced a corner where people can take pictures of themselves reading their favorite book. And we publish this because we want to encourage more people to read. Having said that, I also want to say that writing for children is a very important thing because if you can get children to start reading early, they will stay with that culture all their adult life. I remember when I was a young boy, maybe class 1, class 2, we used to have books like Musa and Abata. I don't know whether Mozemba would remember it. And then we had books like Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. Very nice books. We had the Ladybird series. We had books like The Gum on the Gate, Hair is Bad. And we used to love these books. And then as we progressed, we got more challenging books. And I remember when we were in secondary school, we would read novels under the table if the teacher is boring. And we were happy that we could experience the world, the alternative worlds that these writers were creating. Talking about the curriculum, first of all, I think the new curriculum that's coming up is going to help children to become, to realize their potential, because it is not now based so much on academics, but to find out what you can do best. When I was growing up, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I could not tell people because there are no writers around me. So I would tell people I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, but deep down, I knew that what I wanted to do was writing. Now we have all these role models. The number of writers has grown, and we have a huge potential to influence storytellers, not just people who write books, people who write plays, people who write movies, and people who are going to take storytelling to the next level. So for me, there's a lot of hope, and there's no reason why we should say that because we didn't sell many books this year, we can't sell more books next year. Yeah. All
right, thank you. Thank you. Nganga Mbugo, who is the editor of the Saturday Nation, and of course tucked away in that particular daily is that particular paper is the Reader's Corner, of which is alluded to, that has grown exponentially because, of course, people also have a flash of interest that actually is with books as well. So we want actually to hear from them and pick up some of the salient points that they raised this morning. Remember also, you're free to call in, ask questions or share contributions and tell us what you're reading. I can see also we have Barowasa is asking a very critical question. Baroswa Kip Chirichiri is asking, are public libraries in all 47 counties? If not, we still have a long way to go in reading culture. If you may just pick up that particular tweet, please. Are public libraries in all 47 counties? If not, we still have a long way to go in reading culture. Also, we have Linda Schumer. If my director may just pick up on this as well. This is what actually Baroswa was saying. Our public libraries in all 47 counties. If not, we still have a long way to go. And I think a critical man to answer this particular question will be Richard Aruti, who's the CEO of the Kenya National Library Services. And of course, he could not have to be, he could not actually manage to be here today. They are away in Nakuru on a capacity building, but we'll call him and ask him that critical question as well. And also we have Abok Zanke is saying it's good to see Mozambique advocating for books, but it's sad when he turns down young talented writers without reviews, right? So he's here. He's going to ask to answer that critical question. Has he been turning away young writers, and why? And we know many of them are being turned away. Is it because they don't have good scripts? So we're here to ask him this critical question. Also, Mahad Abdi is saying, I'm reading the Quran. It is recommended to read it early in the morning because it helps you to remember God throughout the day, thus staying away from sins. That is what Mahad Abdi is saying this morning. So what are you reading? I want to know. Tell us what you're reading this morning, of course, and we'll pick up that. And of course, my director, Diana, also, she's going to put up numbers momentarily on the screens for you to call and ask questions or share your contribution. If you have a manuscript, this is a moment for you. We have publishers here. Then you can actually get in touch with them and how they can go to, they will go to show you how you can actually, publish your book as well. So let's hear from some of our panelists. We'll begin with David Waweru. You've mentioned the critical issues that, yes, in this country, policy is a big niggling worry when it comes to books as well. And you talked of structures. When you talk of structures, we want you now to expound more. What do you mean by structures? What structures are we looking at?
Well, thank you very much. And I think two of the callers or people who've contacted you, Kipchirchir
yes.
and Lynn, have basically talked about national libraries.
Yes.
I'm aware that right now, I think the Kenya National Libraries has probably 62 or 63 outlets. Mm-hmm. And I'm not too sure what the spread of that is across the countries, whether all the counties are covered, but I think a significant number of counties are covered. However, when you look at the geographical spread of counties, even the smallest counties, if there's only one national library, you can imagine the difficulties of getting there. Mm-hmm. So, and you know that reading, just like any other habit, is a function of how accessible is it. Because we are saying that for those who are not able to purchase books or purchase sufficient number of books, mm-hmm. access to a library is critical. Yes. So one of the things that should be encouraged is an expansion of the number of national libraries across the counties, not just one in a county, but many in different corners of the county. Yes. Number two, we need to encourage community libraries, mm-hmm. and I'm glad that there are very many people, particularly NGOs, who are very active in this. Number three is to ensure that every school yes. has got a library. And my proposal would probably be that in as many schools as would be possible, that some of their libraries are probably open to the communities around. Because if we have farmers reading, mm-hmm. they will know how to improve their crop yield, yes. How to improve their yield from their cows, and all that. So as many libraries as possible. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Number two is basically to ensure that there are as many well-written books as possible and that there is an infrastructure where people can access that. And in Kenya, it's probably one of the countries that has the biggest infrastructure of books, of bookshops. And so if we have many books being published and being released, and they are distributed well through the channels of distribution, whether those are bookshops or supermarkets or wherever else, that would help a great deal. And just like John said, we recognize that government has very many priority areas. Yes. Education is one of them. But I think there also ought to have sufficient number of people who want to push the reading agenda, invest in publishing. For example, one of the problems is, the fact that you can't publish as many people who are writing. And what is part of the problem is basically the number of publishing houses yes. You find in this country. So you have millions of people who have the capability to write, but there are the gates they are trying to get into is so squeezed so that only a few can pass through, every single year. So having policies that incentivize investment in the knowledge economy, in the publishing industry would be very critical. 3, there are things like policy issues, for example.
We'll discuss
like
policy issues. Just hold on to that. We want to hear, you talk of policy issues, and I think also you picked on quality as well. When you're talking about quality, and we have also young writers who are coming to you and they're saying, you turn us away without even good reviews as well on how we can improve. Is it the quality of manuscripts that actually is wanting, or what would be the critical issue? And yes, you as Oxford, are you just mainstreaming on curricular books, for schools, or what other genres are you looking at? Maybe you can enlighten us on that as well.
No, as I've said, we have Nangambugo here. He's one of our authors.
Yes.
So if at Oxford we were just dealing with curriculum books, he wouldn't be one of our authors. So we have published many readers, hundreds and hundreds of readers and novellas and novels at Oxford University Press, because we realize that you cannot divorce reading fiction from the textbook. The two are supposed to go together. Now, talking about the young people who come, as he has said, if you have about 20 or so major publishing houses,
yes,
and then you have 40 million Kenyans, it's like the threshold is very high. And then Kenya, unlike the West, we don't have literary agents.
Yes.
So we receive manuscripts from class 8, pupils to university professors. So we are just bombarded with hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts. So what usually happens is that it takes time to review.
Yes.
But for us, for instance, we usually, and I know all the publishers, I've worked for more than, now this is the 3rd publishing house I've worked in. Publishing houses, the ones I've worked with and the ones I've talked to, usually give a review, they give a report, and they tell the author, please correct this, or there's no story here. You see, for you as a young person or as an author, the first thing you need to do is tell a story. Is there a story? So we look at, is there a story? Forget about the other semantics and stylistics and everything. First of all, the basic question is there a story in this, in this novel? Sometimes we read a manuscript, so-called manuscript, and there's no story. So we advise the author, please go back and change this. But most of the young people do not want to change things. Some of them say, I've written the best book, and I don't know why you should tell me not to change. So I've realized that most of the people I've worked with,
yes,
and who have published are actually people who are very, who can listen. And when you tell them, change this to suit this, because you can write even a children's book, you can write a novella, you need to target your audience. If you're writing for a class 1 people, for instance,
yes,
it has to be very simple. Yeah, so I think we just need to work on that, and we are doing our best. I'm sorry if you have been turned away without being given a review or a reason. Every publisher is supposed to give you a reason why they've turned away your book.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Can I
no.
contribute
Please.
a bit to that? First, I want to tell you a little bit about my own story. Then I'll tell you about what writers need to do. If my memory serves me right, I finished writing my first book, maybe 1990 or thereabout. I got my first rejection slip in 1994, and I got my first book published in 2000. What happens with writers is that most times they give up after getting the first rejection slip, and then they do not know how to separate between the rejection of the book and the rejection of themselves, because by nature writers are emotional people. But if you are committed to becoming a writer, you have an obligation to yourself to improve your craft and to become better with every subsequent book. Even in Ngugi's case, the first book that he wrote was not the first one that was published. And if you read the stories of all the leading authors across the world,
yes,
some of them got as many as 20 or 100 rejection slips. So the thing I'd like to tell authors is, don't give up. Even if your first book is rejected, continue writing, start your next project. And what I've discovered, I keep telling this to young writers whenever we have workshops, that according to Malcolm Gladwell, you become world class if you can do 10,000 hours in your craft. So you cannot write for 1 hour and then you believe that you are now world class. You have to put in time and effort. And I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said that writing is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. You have to work at your craft.
So what the 10,000 hours rule also really applies when it comes to...
They should read a book called Outliers. It says if you want to become world class in what you do, you have to put in a minimum of 10,000 hours. That's why they do it for pilots and for other guys like
right.
that.
Outliers, of course, are recommended there by Ngangambugwa, Malcolm Gladwell as well. Let's see. Here is a very critical point about also manuscripts that are really wanting. But isn't it also within the remit of the publishers to maybe also hold clinics on how writers can improve, workshops, seminars, right? Are you doing that? Because you can just turn away people and say, no, this script is not good, there's no story on this particular manuscript. But then how do you help me to develop that particular, to hone my skill?
Yeah, we hold...
Let's see from David. David, we'll come to you.
Yes. For any investor, they must understand what are the critical success factors for my business. And for publishers, one of the critical, in fact, the key ingredient for publishing is the author. The entire publishing cycle begins with the author, who is the formulator of the creator of the idea, the formulator of the words, the word artist. So it begins with them, and it ends with the reader. And of course, there is a whole publishing process.
Yes.
It therefore means that for a publisher to be successful, you've got to invest in raising capable writers. And I know that there are quite a number of publishing houses, including ourselves, who have invested in bringing up authors.
Yes.
But again, like we are saying, there are too few people performing a very large task.
Yes.
That's number one. But number two, aligned with that, is that it is also the role of the publisher to ensure that they have well-qualified authors to work with writers. Because now, if we expect that writers will be master, they will have everything in place, it's a very tall order. We will never get a good manuscript.
Yes.
So the publisher basically sniffs, like John said, is there a good idea? Is there potential for developing that story? And then link a potential author with a good editor, and they work together to develop a good... Now, some of the people we even talk about, if the Ngugi wa Thiong'o did not have good editors working with them, the story might be different. Now, he mentioned one of the big problems we have in this country is that we don't have literary agents who are like go-betweens between authors and publishers, so that a literary agent is able to look at your work before it goes to the publishing house, assesses it, and then, of course, also advises you on what kind of publishing house should you be approaching, what should you be strengthening. And maybe that's one area that we need to probably develop further, so that we can also walk along and encourage our writers. There are some people who write very badly, but they have a powerful idea. It's just like diamond. It looks ugly when you just mine it. But there has got to be someone who has the ability, the insight, to look at that which is muddled up and see a diamond in it, and invest in the process of cleaning it up and refining it and making it something of value. Many of the celebrated authors today may have been judged wrong by their quality of the manuscript if somebody didn't take care to look at the quality of the idea.
And that is the onus now of the auditor, actually, to actually take the diamond in the rough, clean it up and polish and, you know, have a sparkling, you know, author coming up or maybe a writer coming up. I wonder, maybe for you, Nganga, you've been actually in this business for quite a while, and of course you get, you know, inundated with so many requests, people forwarding, you know, the articles as well. What really makes for a good article? Very briefly before we come to John.
For newspaper writing, there's something that we call the hook. You see, newspaper editors are people who are very busy, and on a day-to-day basis, they receive hundreds and hundreds of stories that compete for their attention. But if your story has what we call the hook, that within the first paragraph, the editor feels he wants to go to the second paragraph, then you have something that is potentially worth publishing. What happens is that many writers, they have a good idea, but they hide it at the very back of what they are trying to say. But for you to catch the attention of the editor, you have to get him from the word go. We call it the hook.
The hook.
Yeah. So when you are sending in articles for publication, and this also goes for books, get the hook. And once it's like the fish, if you want to fish and you don't have something that is in the nduano, the fish will not come to your fishing hook.
Yes.
So it's the same thing. You have to have something that will entice the editor, because the editor is the first reader. I think it's important to emphasize that. And he says, if I have enjoyed reading this, it is possible that other people will enjoy reading this. And when you are writing, whether you are writing a book or you are a newspaper article or a magazine article, if you enjoy writing it, chances are someone else will enjoy reading it. If you are writing fiction, and I think this is also important for guys who are trying to come up, people think in terms of images. They do not think in terms of sentences. When you are writing, try to create a mental image. Paint a picture using words. Don't just write words on the paper. Try to create an image for your reader. That, because you see the way people watch movies, and then maybe a scene goes blank, and then the audience fills in what happens when the film goes blank. It's the same thing.
Right.
Try to hook your readers.
Try to hook your readers. Of course, do you have a bait also on your story? And this is what John was talking about. Where is the story? Right? This is what John is asking. Where is the hook? He's going through all this manuscript, but he cannot see the hook. We have Eldoret. Of course, we have Emmanuel from Eldoret hanging on the line, and of course, he has a question or a contribution this morning. Good morning, Emmanuel.
Good morning to you.
Morning to you. You have a question or a contribution for our panelists today?
Yes, I have a contribution or something that I'd like to challenge.
Yes, please.
And weigh in about reading in Kenya. First of all,
yes.
I am a filmmaker.
You're a filmmaker.
Manu Maina, yeah?
Yes.
Now the thing is this: in film, we have in the industry of film, we are struggling to have our films screened, yeah. And I would like to borrow that ideology back to the writing scene. Now, in Kenya today, we have so many books that are being sold in the streets.
Yes.
We have so many books being sold in the streets that for 100 shillings published in the States, and probably or some in other countries that are brought back to Kenya.
Yes.
Now what happens is those books give an ideology or an image of a different world. We want to create our reading culture here in Kenya, or promote our writers here in Kenya. Now, what I'm thinking is, if that has to happen, we have to tell our story. If that has to happen, we have to relate with the people that we are trying to make them read.
Yes.
Now, for example, if to increase the level of people reading and the stories being showed, being told to our people, we need to make sure that our writers write books and our publishers publish them. Let me borrow from Hollywood in the early 90s, 1900s.
Yes.
What happened was they had a space where they were like, they need to create content for their people. They need to entertain them. And when that happened in film, now that's when film was made for them to be entertained.
Yes.
Now, if I borrow that back to Kenya, those books that I'm talking about that are in the streets should be banned. They should be banned to create space for people to need, people to want to read. when doing that, the writers now will have space to have their books published and even sold.
Yes.
Now, currently, if you compare the price of the books that are in the market, that are in the streets, they are like 100 shillings for a whole book, 200 shillings, and the writer's books go for 1,000, sometimes 600. They are really trying to come down now.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Right, okay. we appreciate your input, Emmanuel. They are calling from Eldoret. Yes, should we ban? Of course, you are the publisher. You are the people who are getting affected by this. The street vendors who are selling books for cheap. You know, some of them coming here illegally through our ports as well. How do we control that? Because yes, people are complaining about the expensive books that we can buy from bookstores, or even maybe the ones that are really coming from the publishers as well. How then do we navigate those choppy waters? Because I can see also Nganga has disagreed on that. We can hear from you.
I think the issue is now, I can go back to the hardware. It's about our country enabling. We are the only country, I think, in the region with South Africa that taxes books. 16% VAT on books was imposed. So that tells you that we want these books to go at a premium, even as a country. So the first step should be, first of all, remove VAT on books. But I don't think we should ban books, second-hand, books, because I can buy a book today, I read it, and decide to sell it. And furthermore, we are supposed to have, a free flow of ideas. So I think we as a country should work on our own infrastructure, remove VAT on books, remove impediments. If we just remove VAT on books, for instance, maybe the books will come down because VAT is 16%, but remember it's accumulated. The cost of the book itself could come down by about 30%. We've done those computations, and David is here. They know. So we can begin from there. So we are putting impediments on the access of books, and we've been saying, as the Kenya Publishers Association, we've talked to the government, we've talked to Parliament, we've told them that, first of all, the best gift you can give this country in terms of reading culture, remove VAT on books.
But
because
what discernible difference will it make if, yes, we have VAT on books still, and Kenyans don't buy books because the culture is not there in the first place? Even if now it is given for free, no one will buy.
It's cyclic.
Right? Yeah.
It is cyclic. It's the chicken and the egg. But let's begin somewhere, because you see, if we put a barrier to something that cannot be accessed, we even make it more difficult for people to access.
Okay,
that's the point.
All right. Let's say from Nganga, do you support that the street vendors, selling these books should be banned from the streets, as Emmanuel is alluding to?
I'm a partisan for books. So there's no way I'm ever going to say that books from Europe or the US should be banned in Kenyan streets, because they are filling a market need that is already existing, and there's no competition between the local books and these books which are coming in the market. And having said that, there's a book I bought for 50 shillings. It's called How to Write a Damn Good Novel. And when I followed the instructions in that book, I wrote a book called Terrorists of the Aberdare, which won the Wahome Mutahi Prize, and was #2 for the Jomo Kenyatta Prize.
I've read it, an interesting book, yeah.
Yeah, so if you tell me that we should ban these books which are being sold on the streets for 100 shillings and 200 shillings, and some of those people selling the books are my friends, I'll say, no, we can't do that. #2, there's a parent I met some time ago, and he was telling me that, I hear you're an author. We were having a drink, and then said, I hear you're an author. I said, yeah. So he told me, tell me one of your books. I told him The Man in Green Dungarees, which Zomba has published. Then he said, Allah, I bought that book for my daughter, and I had no idea you are the author. Because he went to the bookshop with a list, and he said, the school wants these books for my children. And I told him, as a parent, you have to take an interest in the books that your children are reading. Otherwise, you don't know what information they are getting. #2, the problem we are having is not that people are not writing and publishers are not publishing. There is a disconnect between what is happening in the publishing industry, and the distribution. For example, you see, it's not every town that has a bookshop. If you go to Eldoret today, they are complaining that they are, I think, that biggest town in the country, and they don't have a bookshop in the town. So people have to become innovative. Like for myself, what I've done, I've partnered with Naivas. So if you want a book, you can walk to any Naivas store across the country, and you'll get it. When you're buying your milk or you're buying your bread, you can see those books there. And I think
there's a bookstand with your book. Yeah.
Yes. What needs to happen is for publishers to become more innovative, and because the bookshops are not everywhere and they don't have a wide reach, we should find new ways of making sure that the books reach the market.
All right. Let's hear from David. You agree with what Nganga Mbugo is talking about?
First of all, back to the caller.
Yes.
I think there are some ideas that I really like. What he has said, tell our story, local content. And we know, if you remember probably 15 years ago, there's a cabinet secretary for information who came over and said, for example, all media content, we require 40%, basically 40% local content. And what did that do? It basically opened up local industries, and people realized that the only reason we were hooked up to Western materials is because we were in a dearth of local content.
Yes.
And today, some of the most popular content in our media is basically local content. And you can see what policy does. In the 1980, when Kiswahili was elevated to national language, and it became a mandatory subject in schools, what happened? The publishing of Kiswahili books basically went up. Today, if we invested in the policy of ensuring that writing and reading of local languages will take space in our school system, guess what? You will find local content in local languages also growing up. And that's why I say that policy is quite important, because policy guides how people invest and how people make certain decisions. Now, back to the second-hand books. I quite agree that you really can't regulate that. Now, the question is because knowledge is global. I mean, I also want my book, and everybody wants their books to be read everywhere in the world, if that were possible. Now, so we really can't close our borders and say that we can't allow other books to come in. What we need to address are some of the reasons these books are coming in is because of pricing. And if people get donated second-hand books and they are able to pass them through the port without paying duties or whatever it is, it basically means that it will not be a level playing field, because somebody is not paying taxes, is not paying government for anything, but the investor locally is investing so much, being taxed so high, and then they are competing with other things that are not being subjected to the same rules of the game. What I would say is that enforcement of the rule of the law is quite critical, so that we don't have dumping. Of things here. But the issue that John has raised, VAT, it is an urgent matter that government reviews the VAT policy and zero rate books.
All right. You mentioned about the local content also that is stipulated now. I think in some acts that yes, local content from the media houses should be around 40%. But we can see even in light of that, still there's a dearth of good writers to write good script as well. Why aren't we having good programs where you can have a good story, has a nice hook, a nice plot that you can follow through? Still, that is a big worry. So even if we have all this system in place and still we don't have the mechanism to carry out good content, to supply content to all these media houses, that is a niggling worry. You now, as the publishers and of course writers and the authors, how are you interfacing? We had Emmanuel is a filmmaker. He may be also alluding to this fact that yes, we don't have good script writers still who can come with good narratives that maybe can actually pick my interest and hook me for even follow the series as well. How can we have that interface between you and maybe the content generators as well? Any of you can pick on this.
Yeah, I think for me is that listening to Mbugu and also write articles.
Yes.
And I've talked to editors, and they're also struggling the same way we're struggling in finding a good story. And I've talked to filmmakers who are also struggling. So it's something that's really bigger, greater than what we're talking about, not just because good writers are good readers. So if you don't, first of all, read, then you cannot write.
You cannot write, it's true.
Yeah. When I compare, when you look at what happens in the film industry and the movies and everything, why is Nigeria, for instance, where they are? But if you look at a Nigerian script or a Nigerian movie or whatever, with all the juju and everything, they've taken over the continent. And when we go to awards, they also win. There is something about the national psyche when it comes to, I think, art and culture that we need to rethink as a country. South Africa the same way. They have very good writers, and in Kenya we have good writers, but we need to increase the mass of better writers. Yeah.
Right.
I think to take up from where he has stopped, the way to create a big pool of good writers is through training. About 4 or 5 years ago, Daystar University partnered with creative writers to start training for writers, for upcoming writers, which used to run once every academic year. It's unfortunate that the program died, but the National Book Development Council has been holding training workshops for upcoming writers, like 3 or 4 times in a year. And I think if we continue on that trajectory of training writers on practical skills or
yes.
how they can do the craft itself, I think over time we are going to create a critical mass of people who are creative and who can tell good stories. Having said that, it is also important to create a market for these writers. If it's a film industry, we need more television stations to be willing to give young upcoming filmmakers an opportunity. So you can say, for example, as NTV, we'll give half an hour every week to upcoming filmmakers at no cost. And if it's publishers like myself, I mean newspaper editors like myself, we can create a space in the newspapers and we say, once a month, I will give 1 page to creative writing, so that all these young voices who are trying to get a place to launch their career, they can have a space. And that way, if I publish one author and Mwazemba sees this guy has potential, they can start a conversation and take it over from there. So there are 2 things that we need to do. The first one is to invest in training, and the second one is to create a market for these products that will come in the market.
Right. And we have Isaiah Perry asking, ask the gents, have them adopt new writing styles and storytelling. This is what he's saying. New writing styles and storytelling. Maybe you can get a better grasp of, or a better grasp, I should say, of what he's asking this morning. Styles and storytelling, we have different writing styles, and I don't know what maybe, and maybe also different publishing houses also have different styles that they really maybe lean to. I don't know what Oxford leans to. I don't know what a live publishers leans to. Maybe also what really Nation Media Group also looks for when we have these particular articles. Is there a particular style? Very briefly, before we cross over to Richard Aturi, who is the CEO of Kenya National Library Services, hanging on the line to tell us more about how also this particular service is being, helping, or is actually being panned out in the country to help Kenyans as well. Very briefly from you, John.
Yeah, there are many styles, but for me, the most important thing is the story. If there is a story, it can be historical fiction. If those who have read Chimamanda, when she writes about Biafra, the war in Biafra, in half of Waweru San, that's something that happened. So you can talk about the Mama War and fictionalize it and retell it. That's historical fiction. Or you can talk about the future. There's Afrofuturism, which is about, writing things about future. You imagine the future. So for me, that doesn't really matter. What matters is the story engaging? Is it interesting?
Engaging, is it interesting?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, there is no style there is no size that can fit everyone. When you are publishing books, you've got to publish for and write and publish for very specific audiences and their interests. But I think what the person is really talking about is the ability to develop text that engages the reader and that entertains them and that helps them, holds them captive in the reading from the first page to the last page. And that's a function of both writing, but it's also a function of editorial development of a book. And yes, it is possible for us to be as good as the West is in being able to develop literature.
Thank you.
that
people look forward to reading.
All right, Ngangambuga, very briefly.
I think there's a disconnect between the perception and the reality. There is this perception that Kenyan authors don't write gripping stories. What I would like to tell the guy is that the Kenya Publishers Association holds regional book fairs. I think it's every June,
yes,
December,
yeah.
And then every September we have the Nairobi International Book Fair. If you want to see the best books in the market and the newest and the best styles, I think you should come to those fairs and you see what is happening there. Because if you say, oh, Kenyan books are not very well written and you're not reading them, you will be stuck in that mode. So to create a platform where readers can meet these new books, the Kenya Publishers Association has created that platform, so he should show up.
Right. So I'll be remiss if I don't actually ask also Richard Aturi to tell us more about what the Kenya National Library services are doing. He's hanging on the line. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning to you. I'm fine.
Yes, a pity that you couldn't make it to be part of a panel this morning to tell us also what you're doing in the country as far as meeting out, or maybe just you making sure that Kenyans in every county, they have a library. We talked about community libraries as well. So on that front, what is the service, the Kenya National Library Service doing to make sure that we have a reading culture in this nation?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, my apologies that I couldn't be able to join you this morning.
Yes.
I was out of Burundi, but thank you for reaching out to me.
Yes.
And it's really a privilege to comment on the subject about whether Kenya is a reading nation.
Yes.
I wish also to make a correction that my name is Atuti, not Atuli as it's.
Yeah, we will correct that, sir. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Now, in my own considered opinion, the Kenyans are very good leaders.
Kenyans are very good readers.
Yes, and many times we have had this statement of people saying we are not a reading nation.
Yes.
But I think I wish to correct that perception. That we are very good leaders in this country. We have good content. But perhaps the challenge has been that we have adequate and credible sources of information which would facilitate that element of developing reading culture in the country. That has been the challenge. I also want to concur with the presenters this morning,
Yes.
who have indicated that the cost of books are quite high in this country. Because we are looking at the incomes of people, we are looking at the structures that are in place for people to access these information resources.
Thank you.
So it is true that the government could consider and maybe waive VAT on books that could reduce the cost of books and make them affordable.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, that's what that's the only time we have for you, Mr. Aruti. Of course, we look forward to having you on this panel much, of course, later in the course of the year to talk to us about the reading culture. This is something that we need to have on this particular platform, right? Maybe I'll just give you 30 seconds. We start for time to just give you parting shots. What are you reading and what are you working on for them like Nganga Mbuga, who are authors right now? What is really up their collective sleeves as well? 30 seconds from you, John, please. 30 seconds.
Good writers are good readers, so we should begin with reading and then our writing will improve.
Thank you. 30 seconds from David.
Yes, I think like John says, there is great value in reading, personal development. It helps us expand our minds and imaginations, and it helps us get better at what we do at our work, at our workplace, in our relationships, and engaging with ideas also makes us good conversationalists.
Right, thank you. Let's hear from Mara.
I think even as we do the big infrastructure projects, I still make a case for people to read, whether they read Kenyan books or foreign books, because for you to develop the infrastructure, you also need to develop the minds of the people, which is what I call the superstructure. Because for you to have development, you need to have both the physical development of the infrastructure and the mental development of the people for the quality of life to improve. So people should read more.